Hi, now that you know a little bit more about the basic shapes and a little bit about scaling, some deleting objects, we're going to go in a little bit more detail about transforming objects. That is to change the paths or change the size of objects in Adobe Illustrator. In order to do this, we're going to use the basic rectangle, so I'm going to delete this rounded three-sided polygon, aka triangle with the rounded corners, by hitting the delete key after selecting it. I'm going to get to this rectangle here and select this rectangle. When I select this rectangle, we talked a little bit about how we can make the rounded rectangle by dragging these little targets in and out. Going as far out keeps it a solid 90-degree rectangle. 90, 90, 90 equals 360 degrees to complete a rectangle. 4 90s. With this object selected, with this rectangle selected, you can utilize these anchor points to freely change the size of your rectangle. Simply using the selection tool, this one here, click and drag any of these anchor points. The anchor points are the white squares. All right. If you want to do it in a diagonal, you can. If you want to do it just straight left or right, you can use these center ones. The corner ones allow you to do it diagonally up and down, totally free. All right. Notice how when you do that, there's a little pop-up that gets you an estimation of the width and the height. That's fine, but it's only an estimation. It's not 100% accurate. It only goes to the second decimal point, which is incredibly accurate, but we can be more accurate than that. All right. If you need to change the scale of your shape, but would like to keep the shape the same, start to click and drag one of the anchor points, and then hold Shift on your keyboard. That will keep the proportion. Your shape will stay the same shape, but it will scale up and down. In order to release from this and stay in this newly proportioned, what's the same proportion, newly scaled, sized image, you must release the click first and then release the Shift key. If you do that in reverse, you will end up back with the freely transformed size that will follow the cursor and not keep it in proportion. So remember to keep your design in proportion. Scale, start to scale, hold the Shift key, and then once you get it to the scale you wish it to be, release the mouse button and then the Shift key. It has to be in that order. To be more precise with the scaling of your object, you must go up to this transform tool right here. With that object selected, your ribbon, this is your ribbon. Your ribbon changes depending on what you have selected. Some tools up here will appear with other objects selected versus what you have selected now. But if you would like to change the size of this, go up to transform, select this, and you'll get initially the X and Y positions. These are coordinates. In this case, it's telling you the coordinate of the top left corner of our rectangle, right here on the artboard. 0, 0 is right here, and so this is where the top left corner of our rectangle is currently located. We don't need to worry about the location at the moment. We're looking for scale. Scale and size, really, is here. The width and the height of your rectangle is listed by W and H. This little button here says constrain width and height proportions. If we want to make it a different shape, we don't want to keep it the same exact shape, we need to make it so that it's not constrained, right? Right now it's this random size of 12 and some decimal points and 11 and some decimal points. Let's make it a perfect square. So in order to make that, we need to set the numbers to be the same. I type in 5, it'll default to inches. You don't have to type IN, but you can. And then in order to get to the next one, a quick little method to do this is to hit the tab key. That'll get you to the next area where you can type, T-A-B, the tab key, and then you type 5 again, and you hit enter, and there is your 5 by 5 rectangle. Now when you go to the transform, notice how it's precise now. It's still located with the top left corner in the same position. I'll show you what happens if we change this position here. If we scale this around, notice how the number, or move that, that's not the right term, if you move the anchor point, it's not scaling the anchor point, and I guess we did scale it a little bit. We changed the size of it by moving it to the left. It's not 5 by 5 anymore, but if we moved it, it's going to change the position of the anchor point in the top left corner. Now also notice, this is actually a clickable tool. You can change the position of each of these points. So it's referring to the anchor points and the center points that you see on the screen. All right. So if you want your center to be at a certain position, you can change that. If you want your bottom right corner, you can change that to be at a certain position. It's a very nice feature. Next up, beyond transforming things by scale, with an object with a path selected, you can rotate freely by making sure that you hover just outside a corner or a center anchor point. If you get these double arrows that look like a 90-degree turn popped up on your screen, that means when you click and drag, you'll be able to rotate freely. Now by rotating freely, you can set it to whatever you want. You can see the pop-up menu there shows a certain degree that it has rotated. 0 being flat, and after you can, 180 is a complete flip, 270 would be 3/4 of a turn, and if you did 360, it'd be an absolute 100% turn, back to 0. All right, 90 degrees is just 1/4 of a turn, right? Math, fun. Now, you are able to snap when you're freely doing this to those very nice positions. However, there's another way to snap to very commonly used positions. If you hold the Shift key while you are dragging it around, it will move in 45-degree increments. So I'm holding Shift and I'm rotating around, and notice how the numbers are staying as nice even numbers. That's a useful thing if you want to make 45-degree angles or any other angle as a multiple of 45. Going back to sizing for just a moment. If you want to keep something in proportion, but you want to just freely change the size of it, if you start to scale it, notice how you can change the proportion of this. The size, the shape of this is changing. It can become a square, it could be a rectangle right now. If I wanted it to be what it was when you started transforming it, by starting to transform and then holding the Shift key, it keeps it in proportion. Keeps the width and the height in proportion. Then you would let go of the click and then the Shift key. If you do that in reverse, it will go back to the free transform and your shape will not be in proportion. So utilize that. I utilize that more often than not. A lot of holding Shift and scaling at the same time. All right. Then letting go of the click and letting go of the Shift. Keeps it in the proportion that it started with when you began the scaling of your object, the transforming of the size of your object. Okay. That is about it for scaling, aka changing the size of your design. You can rotate there quickly with the selection tool and that little shortcut, little arrow that looks like 90-degree arrow. Lots of good things there. There is one other way of doing this. If you'd like to rotate an object, there's these other two objects here, these other two tools here. This is a rotation tool to rotate on the point that you have selected, and we want to rotate in the center point, and we can rotate, 90 degrees. There we go. Now it's rotating on the center. And yeah, you can type in any number you want, which is very nice. Precision rotating. If you want to shear it, you can shear the design. Rotate it 45 degrees, or really shear it 45 degrees. You can see what that does. I'm going to undo, Control Z to get you back to the square and show you what another number might do. A little bit of a less of a shear. All right. It's moving the sides by 10 degrees. So some fun things that you can do there. If you like this shape and you want to keep it in proportion while you scale something, let's say you know that a design needs to be exactly 4 inches tall, but you don't care necessarily how wide it is. You can hit this button to constrain the height and the width together. It means it keeps the height and the width linked together. They're going to be the same proportion, the same all the time, unless you unlink this. Let's say we know it needs to be 4 inches high. We can then type this in 4, and it'll keep the same proportion, and you notice how it automatically changed the width. So that's a nice feature as well. Okay, so that's that about scaling and transforming and rotating a basic design. You can also, just fun fact in the future, you can choose to scale corners along with items and scale strokes and effects. Oftentimes, if you are using the laser cutter, which is the purpose of the first few lessons here, you don't want to be scaling the stroke, because if you do, the laser cutter will not be able to see the path, as it's only looking for that 0.01 pt stroke. So making sure that this is not selected when you're scaling objects, when you're changing the size of things, so that the stroke can remain 0.01 is incredibly important. This should be the default, so there shouldn't be much needing to be changed here. But if you do notice that your lines are getting thicker when you scale, it could be because your strokes are being scaled with it. Alright? That's it for this video. Thank you very much for listening.